ustedes porque el primer paso de esta peregrinación penitencial es el de renovar mi pedido de perdón y decirles de todo corazón que estoy profundamente dolido. Pido perdón por la manera en la que lamentablemente muchos cristianos adoptaron la mentalidad colonialista de las potencias que oprimieron a los pueblos indígenas. Estoy dolido. Te traemos en nuestra aridez y en nuestras dificultades. Te traemos los traumas de la violencia padecida por nuestros hermanos y hermanas indígenas. En este lugar bendito, donde reinan la armonía y la paz, te presentamos las disonancias de nuestra historia, los terribles efectos de la colonización, el dolor imborrable de tantas familias, abuelos y niños. Hermanos y hermanas, son preguntas que cada uno de nosotros se hace a sí mismo. Y son también cuestiones candentes que resuenan en el corazón de la Iglesia que peregrina en Canadá, en este arduo camino de sanación y reconciliación que está realizando. También nosotros, ante el escándalo del mal y ante el cuerpo de Cristo herido en la carne de nuestros hermanos indígenas, a la multitud de peregrinos que suben la escala santa, que evoca la subida de Jesús al pretorio de Pilatos. También hoy, también aquí, quisiera decirles que estoy muy apenado y quiero pedir perdón por el mal que cometieron no pocos católicos en esas escuelas que contribuyeron a políticas de asimilación cultural y desvinculación.
A long overdue apology, an admission of the Catholic Church's shameful legacy of abuse. An acknowledgement of Canada's cultural genocide of Indigenous people. In the last week of July, during his 6-day penitential trip to Canada, Pope Francis made a series of apologies for the horrors inflicted by church-run Indigenous residential schools. In 2021, the discovery of hundreds of potential burial sites at former Canadian Native schools shocked the world. More than 150,000 Native children in Canada were forced to attend these state-funded Christian schools from the 19th century until the 1970s. It was a bid to erase their culture, their way of life. They were isolated from their families and homes at a tender age. Catholic religious orders ran most of the schools under successive Canadian government's policy of assimilation. The children were beaten for speaking their native languages. Many were sexually abused. Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls it a cultural genocide. The Canadian government has admitted that physical and sexual abuse was rampant at these schools. Pope Francis finally decided to comply with the Truth Commission's call for him to apologize on Canadian soil. But what does his historic apology mean to the Indigenous community?
The importance of saying something about what happened and how so many never got that opportunity.
Pretty much empty feelings. I didn't feel that there was any passion of the speech being delivered. I've also could feel many of my ancestors or children on how they must have felt when being greeted by members of the church when they were going to residential school and not being able to understand any of the words that were being said to them. So that was how we were addressed in there. We were addressed in his native language, Spanish, and the translation was in French, and many of us that were survivors that were brought in did not understand French.
Apologize on behalf of his bad apples. He didn't apologize of a Catholic church running the 60% of the residential, over 60% of the residential. He didn't apologize for that. He came here, I don't know, and asking for forgiveness. I don't know, no, not for me anyways. You want me to heal? Tell the Pope to rescind this and tell the Queen, to ask the Queen to come here and apologize, kiss my moccasins.
I hope the Pope means it though with all his heart, because it broke my family. It broke all of it. But we need to break the cycle of hate. That's all I have to say.
We are strong people. We are strong. We are Métis, and we were taught how to love, to respect, and to honor. And that was our destiny. And that today I sit proudly and I say to my prayers and to my friends that are long time gone, but I know they're hearing me, and they know my heart is just full. I know that I'm so happy and I'm so grateful. And I thank God that we had the opportunity to come to see our honored, beloved Pope.
Don't think he gave an apology. He suggested it, but in actual fact, I don't think he apologized.
What did you want him to say?
Yes, the church is responsible for what we did. But it never came anywhere near that.
What do you think about him coming here?
Waste of our money. We're just letting him travel around on our government's money, and he's wasting it doing, what do you call that, publicity? Or trying to earn money for the church. I'm not very much into believing in the church anymore for that.
Indigenous or Aboriginal peoples is a collective name for the original peoples of North America and their descendants. In Canada, the term refers to First Nations, Métis and Inuit peoples. There are original inhabitants of the land that is now Canada, but their very existence was threatened by colonization and white settlement. Today, they make up about 5% of Canada's population. According to the 2016 census, more than 1.67 million people in Canada are Indigenous. They have higher levels of poverty and a lower life expectancy than other Canadians. They are more often victims of violent crimes. Many Indigenous leaders consider this legacy of torture as the root cause of the epidemic rates of alcohol and drug addiction in their community. Given this history, is the Pope's apology enough? The reaction to his visit to Canada has been mixed. The government seems to believe his apology didn't go far enough. He didn't accept the full blame for the institutional role played by the Catholic Church in these residential schools. On August 9th every year, the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples is celebrated to raise awareness and protect the rights of the world's indigenous population. According to a World Bank report, there are an estimated 476 million indigenous peoples worldwide. They make up just 6% of the global population and account for about 19% of the extreme poor. Let's see who they are. What challenges do they face? And why they are being left behind in the road to progress.
Bueno, pues Pachamamas, Ucamarquillimana Chachilas.
More than 18 million indigenous people reside in South America. 2 million of them are in Chile. The Mapuche make up about 12% of Chile's population. Mapuche means people of the land. Before the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century, the Mapuche inhabited a large amount of territory in southern Chile. With a reputation for being fierce, they managed to resist conquest until the late 19th century. Most of their land was sold off to forestry companies. This is the Araucania region. It has one of the highest poverty rates in the country. Members of the Mapuche group have long-standing disputes with companies in the area, mainly forestry. They are demanding the state return lands that they consider theirs by ancestral right. Clashes between Chilean security forces and indigenous Mapuche often turn deadly. In recent years, sabotage has increased in the region, with the burning of houses, trucks and machinery. In the early hours of August 1st, 4 aircraft were destroyed during an arson attack in Curacautén, a town in the Araucania region. Authorities said the attack was carried out by the indigenous Mapuche Maleco Resistance Organization. a group that is being targeted by the Chilean government. In June, Chile approved a draft resolution that declares 4 organizations of the Mapuche indigenous people as illegal and terrorist organizations.
No se va a poder mientras no reconozcan al pueblo y nación.
As long as the Mapuche people and nation are not recognized, dialogue will not be possible. Because the government is not recognizing us. It does not even want to recognize what the Mapuche lands are.
La negrita, esa. Esa es la que me escuché. Y no se acerca.
But things might change now. On September 4th, Chileans will vote on a new constitution. It could bring the most sweeping changes to the country since the end of former President Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship. The proposed new constitution offers constitutional recognition to indigenous peoples. It's been a long fight for many Aboriginal communities on the continent. In Brazil's far west lies this immense swath of rainforest, the Javari Valley. It is one of the largest indigenous territories in Brazil. Encompassing 85,000 square kilometers, it is nearly as big as Portugal. The Javari Valley has a reputation for being a lawless zone. Its tropical bounty has made it a hotspot for illegal activities. On the 5th of June, Bruno Pereira, a Brazilian indigenous expert, was murdered along with British journalist Dom Phillips. Pereira had been introducing the British journalist to the indigenous people he could interview for a book about the Amazon. The local media reported that the duo were murdered for trying to protect indigenous people from drug traffickers and illegal miners, loggers, and hunters. The brutal crime generated an intense international outcry. Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, came under heavy criticism for his allegedly slow response to their disappearance. Protesters also called for the resignation of FUNAI agency's chief, Marcelo Xavier. FUNAI is the Brazilian government body that establishes and carries out policies relating to indigenous peoples. Federal prosecutors in Brazil have charged 3 men for the murders. Prosecutors said 2 of the 3 fishermen they have charged have confessed to the murders. On August 1st, an Aboriginal activist marched across the floor of the Senate in Australia.
Well, please recite the affirmation on the card handed to you.
I, Sovereign Lydia Thorpe, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will be faithful and I bear true allegiance to the colonising Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Senator Thorpe.
Senator Lydia Thorpe took aim at Queen Elizabeth by calling her a colonizer.
Recite the oath as printed on the card, so please recite the oath.
The British monarch is still head of state in Australia. She was instructed to retake her oath of office. Thorpe has been a senator since September last year and was re-elected at the federal election in May. She believes that Australia should establish a truth-telling commission to shed light on the history of genocide and dispossession suffered by indigenous people through colonization. Meanwhile, the Australian government is seeking a referendum on recognizing indigenous minorities in the Constitution.
We are seeking a momentous change, but it is also a very simple one.
It's not a matter of special treatment or preferential power. It's about consulting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on the decisions that affect you. Nothing more, but nothing less. This is simple courtesy. It is common decency.
Australia's constitution makes no reference to Indigenous people, whose leaders have toiled for generations to win recognition for injustices suffered since European colonization in the 1700s. Australia was a British colony for more than 100 years. It was originally established as a penal colony. Indigenous inhabitants were displaced or killed. The doctrine of terra nullius was established under the British colonial government. The Latin term means land belonging to no one. It invalidated the sovereignty of Indigenous nations, giving white settlers the right to subjugate Indigenous peoples. It persisted in Australian law until as recently as 1992. Although the country became its own nation in 1901, it became part of the Commonwealth, much like India. Even today, Australia is the only major Commonwealth country in the world that does not have a treaty with its First Nations peoples. According to activists, Aboriginal Australians are still suffering the effects of their colonial past. The gap in inequality between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians is huge, especially in the justice system. An Australian human rights report found that Indigenous people were 17 times more likely to be arrested than non-Indigenous folks. Can this change? For that to happen, there needs to be more representation for Indigenous peoples in society, including in the top echelons of power. In 2006, Evo Morales was elected as the first ever native Indian president of Bolivia. Last year, Nanaya Marhuta became the first woman to be appointed as New Zealand's Minister for Maori Development. She was also the first minister to begin wearing a moko kawe, a traditional facial tattoo worn by Maori women, while serving in Parliament. Indian President Draupadi Murmu is also a woman of many firsts. She is the country's first Indigenous president. She belongs to the Santhal tribe, the third largest scheduled tribe community in India, after the Gonds and Bhils. Indigenous peoples are spread across 90 countries. They represent 5,000 different cultures. In 2007, the UN General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But they continue to be marginalized. In most countries, they face the same harsh realities: eviction from their ancestral lands and discrimination. In a first, the Pope finally went to Canada to apologize. Indigenous leaders hope it will help survivors and their families heal. Calls for Queen Elizabeth to apologize on behalf of the Anglican Church and Crown have been predating his visit. So far, it's been falling on deaf ears.